When Batman Caped Crusader was announced, executive producer Bruce Timm made it explicitly clear that Batman would be the only costumed superhero in this universe. No Superman, no Wonder Woman, and no Justice League. So when they introduced the character of Jim Corrigan as a member of Commissioner Gordon's trusted inner circle, some fans took note. In the comics, Jim Corrigan was the alter ego of the Spectre, a supernatural hero who was literally the personification of God's vengeance in little green trunks and a cape. However, what they may not have known is that the series' head writer, Ed Brubaker, worked on an excellent comic book called Gotham Central, and I've talked about this series on my comics channel. Go check that out if the subject interests you, I've linked to it in the info button. But this series featured another Jim Corrigan who was a corrupt officer. He sold lost crime scene evidence on the black market and murdered one of his fellow officers to keep the secret. So it seemed pretty clear what was going on in the show when they had their Corrigan attempt to murder Barbara Gordon to claim a massive bounty. There's no way a scumbag like him would become the Spectre. Flash forward to Caped Crusader Season 2, and Bruce Timm is less involved and Ed Brubaker moved on to spearhead his own show, Criminal. Enter new head writer Jeff Thorne and a bunch of fresh writers, and I guess they had different ideas. Because in the episode The Spectral Hand, Jim Corrigan returns and kind of becomes the Spectre, but there are some pretty significant differences. What immediately caught my eye about this episode is that it was written by comics veteran DeMatteis, who had a decent run on the Spectre comics back when Hal Jordan wore the cloak. This version of the character is pretty different. He's not a religious figure in the slightest. He's arguably not even a hero. He's more of a tragic figure in the vein of Frankenstein's monster, trying to right some wrongs before it's too late. Corrigan was identified as an ideal test subject for a radical experiment that could extend the human lifespan. If he agreed to be a test patient, and if the experiment was successful, he would get early release from prison. But of course the reason why they're testing the process on convicts is because it has not been perfected and there is a very good chance that the test subject will die. In order to begin the process, they first have to stop Corrigan's heart, so in effect he is executed. Now, as Barbara was the victim of his crimes, she was informed of what was happening and she is not happy about it. She focuses on the worst case scenario, from her perspective at least, that Corrigan will get to walk free after less than a year in prison. And so she's determined to be a witness for the experiment so that she can face him and show that she doesn't fear him, although it's pretty clear that his betrayal shook her to her core. Now, as you might expect, the experiment goes wrong. Corrigan is technically brought back to life, but he's essentially killed again. The energy running through him makes his skin tighten and go pale, like a mummified corpse, and a white streak runs through his hair. It is an agonizing death and far less humane than an actual execution, but this is what he signed up for. And seeing Corrigan die doesn't bring Barbara any sort of closure. What makes this moment work emotionally is that the narrative avoids the cliche of sudden forgiveness or unearned pity. Barbara doesn't watch Corrigan die and magically soften her view of him. She still thinks he's a piece of trash who tried to put a bullet in her head. What sickens her is the total lack of catharsis. She went to that experiment looking for closure, expecting to reclaim her power by looking her betrayer in the eye. Instead, she was forced to watch a man suffer a brutal, botched death. She just inherited a front-row memory of state-sanctioned butchery, leaving her feeling hollow rather than vindicated. And the other prisoners are very unhappy about Corrigan's fate too. Not because they had any affection for him, criminal cops are the lowest of the low in their eyes. It's more that if the warden would allow a former cop to be killed, then what would he do to the rest of them? This starts a riot that Batman ends up dealing with. Now, it's really fitting that this story takes place during a snowstorm on Christmas Eve. Happy holidays, Barbara, right? Because the snowy landscape adds an air of pathos. On the way to the morgue, Corrigan suddenly sits upright, scares the crap out of the orderlies, and they crash their van. This allows Corrigan to venture out into Gotham. And what I really like is the parallel to Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Or maybe it'd be more accurate to say that it's a riff on it. Almost everyone in Gotham is listening to a radio dramatization of that book, and the episode mirrors the idea of three ghosts visiting Scrooge, except it flips it, and it's one ghost visiting three scoundrels and delivering justice. Corrigan has been completely changed by the experiment. Not only does he look like a shambling corpse, but he speaks in a low, slow mutter, only letting out a few words at a time. Even the most basic sentence feels like it strains him. He heads to a dive bar looking for Vinny DeLeon, who immediately recognizes Corrigan despite his radical new look and pulls a gun on him. Despite getting shot twice, Corrigan shows no sign of slowing down and his eyes glaze over in a black mist with a skull-like white pattern. This causes Vinny to have a heart attack and drop dead right there. So this is a play on how the Spectre would issue fitting punishments to evildoers. He'd often come up with ironic and horrifying ways of dealing with his targets. Here, though, his methods of killing the baddies are a bit more grounded, but still just as gnarly. His second target, Roger Marshall, had been beating on his girlfriend in public, and Corrigan's powers cause him to get run over by a bus full of Christmas carolers, which was darkly funny. The third target, Freddie Bork, ends up falling off a roof and getting impaled by the star on top of the city's massive Christmas tree in front of a huge crowd of onlookers. But the thing about Corrigan's power is that it's not always lethal. When Batman tries to stop him from chasing Bork across the rooftops, the power causes a neon sign to tip over and pin Batman down. Really what it seems to do is issue a fitting punishment based on their crimes. DeLeon conned dozens of people out of their life savings, Marshall murdered his wife, and Bork was behind a drug ring. Corrigan was the arresting officer in their cases, but they all got off due to insufficient evidence. Before Corrigan turned corrupt, he was the officer who put the handcuffs on them. Watching the courts throw out his work was likely one of the many things that eroded his faith in the law in the first place. It's clear that these miscarriages of justice weighed heavily on Corrigan, so much so that when he returned from the dead, it's the first thing he wanted to deal with, in a twisted way of dishing out justice. This ties directly into one of the oldest rules in ghost stories, the idea that spirits remain tethered to the mortal plane because they have unfinished business. In classic folklore, a soul cannot cross over, it is weighed down by an unfulfilled oath, an unavenged murder, or an unresolved debt. And here Corrigan has one more scoundrel to deal with before he can pass on. Himself. Corrigan takes the train across town to the suburbs where Barbara Gordon lives, and Batman assumes he means her harm, to finish what he started. But in reality, all Corrigan wants from Barbara is forgiveness. Barbara too had assumed that he had meant her harm, and when he comes to her door she points a gun at him. But despite how monstrous he now is and the way he had harmed her, she cannot bring herself to shoot him. But what she can do is talk to him. She wasn't a criminal who escaped justice. He had tried to kill her. She's able to say her piece to him to really hammer home how badly he hurt her with his betrayal. That moment of confrontation serves a dual purpose. For Corrigan, seeking her forgiveness is the final act that settles his conscience. But for Barbara, it grants her the thing the Botched Experiment denied her: real closure. Facing her attacker while he's broken and genuinely remorseful allows her to release the lingering dread that had taken over her life. As she admits afterwards, she's not all right, but for the first time she thinks she will be, eventually. And with that, Corrigan uses his powers one last time on himself. And what horrible fate awaits him? Nothing worse than what he was currently experiencing. He drops dead in the snow, peacefully. It's a really sad ending, but in a bittersweet kind of way. Corrigan was a corrupt louse, but once upon a time he had been a trusted agent of the law. And while his return from the dead saw him commit 3 ghastly murders, he was, in his own way, righting wrongs. So I think it's pretty clear that Jim Corrigan did not become the Spectre, or at least not the traditional version of the Spectre from the comics. But this is a great example of what I like so much about Caped Crusader. The writers take a basic concept from the comics, strip it down to its core, and mould it to suit a noir pseudo-1940s world. This approach allows the show to technically honour Bruce Timm's mandate while still giving fans a recognisable pull from the long boxes. Batman remains the sole costumed superhero in this universe, because Corrigan isn't presented as a hero at all. He's a broken, wounded man trying to make up for some of the biggest failures of his life. The Spectre is reframed through the lens of classic 1940s universal monster horror and tragic noir fiction. They took a shining divine hero from the comics and reimagined him as a rotting, tragic corpse bound to the earth by the weight of his own moral failures. But what do you think about how Caped Crusader handled Jim Corrigan's story? Did you enjoy this tragic horror-inspired take on the Spectre, or were you hoping for a more traditional comic book adaptation? Share your thoughts in the comments below because I will be reading them all. Special thanks as ever to my channel members who helped to make this video possible. If you want to see your name on screen and get early access to all of my upcoming video essays, then join the channel now. Thanks for watching everyone. See you next time.